How's it going, everybody? This podcast is brought to you by Rise Make Life Workout, a health, self-development, and lifestyle platform building a passionate community of knowledge seekers, creative dreamers, and future leaders.
For details on the latest Rise event that will feature expert speakers in the field of self-development and growth, check out www.rise-workout.com.
That's www.rise-workout.com. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rise Optimize, where we make science simple to help you optimize your health. My name is Shenae and today I'm joined by Dr. Char.
Hello.
And today we are talking about modalities of recovery and what the science has to say around them.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. I really like this topic too. It's a lot like fatigue in the sense that everyone has this kind of a sense of what the goal is with recovery, much like how people have a sense of what fatigue is. But it's sort of a little bit difficult to define. It's also hard to objectively measure as well. And it's something that a lot of people are chasing with a bunch of different sort of strategies or modalities. Yeah, that's sort of the technical word for it. But so we'll talk through some of those that work and many of those that don't.
Yeah. And like you said, a lot of them that just get, I guess, promoted in the media, and sometimes they do apply to everyday people. Sometimes it's more the elite athletic population and sort of working out what the dosage is and how long you need to be doing that for to really get a benefit, if anything.
Yeah, exactly. I think I instantly think of some of the crazy things you see on like the sidelines of the NFL or the NBA, like people in those big compression boots and stuff. Or I remember watching an NBA game of Kobe Bryant late in his career, and he was just wrapped in ice, like his arms, his legs, like everything just laid on ice in between his time on the court. Yeah, so we can kind of touch on when maybe that the icing anyway is perhaps appropriate, but other times that it's completely not.
Yeah. I look forward to this.
Yeah.
So do you feel we should start on covering, I guess, like you said, some of those reasons as to why we seek out recovery, like what we're trying to achieve by implementing some of these recovery techniques and what effects that we're trying to have over the body?
Yeah, so like I was talking before about people tend to have a general sense of what the goal is with recovery. I suppose a reasonable or practical way of thinking about it is that we're trying to get the body back to a state where we can complete the required intensity. If we're on some kind of training program, we can compete at the level that we are required to if we happen to be competing, or we just want to try reduce soreness so we can engage in an activity the way that we intend to, essentially. So that kind of covers the different contexts of what recovery might look like. The key there being that it in some respects it is context dependent, depending on what your goals are and what you're trying, the time span at which you're required to recover by. So I think that's kind of a good starting point. So for example, recovery for someone in the midst of a training cycle that they're completing where the goal is adaptation for whatever sport or application they're wanting to use that for. So in an endurance setting, that would look like, improvements in aerobic capacity and all of the things that the physiological changes that you're trying to promote by engaging in that exercise. So like recovery in that sense could look different to someone who is in the midst of a competition season or required to do a very intense, vigorous activity session, wake up the next day and do it again. Or they're having to do several games in a day. Before this, we spoke about how we both had been to like tournaments in high school where you're doing several games a day. So your recovery span there is a lot shorter. So in that sense, you're not really looking for adaptation. You should have done the training that got you to the point where you were adapted to that level of exercise beforehand, and you're trying to recover to the point where you can engage in that activity again really quickly. So I think that kind of highlights where some of these, or it will help to illuminate where some of these might be helpful and where others just won't be, depending on your goals. But so basically the reason that we need to recover is because exercise is just a stress on the body. So, you know, if you're doing it for training adaptation, you're inducing the stress, hopefully in a way that is systematic, it adheres to a set of training principles, some of which you just posted. So if you want to refresh yourself on that, look at Shenae's Instagram page. So in that context, hopefully you're introducing the right kind of stress, and you want to recover from that so that the right adaptations can happen. So muscles can repair themselves, cells can repair themselves after essentially the stress that you've just put them under. And so I think there are these different kind of proposed things that are a worry or a concern. Oh, maybe not a worry, just that you might be concerned about after exercise. So the stress that exercise introduces could result in these things, and they've been looked into as to like just how much they actually kind of impact your recovery, how long it takes to recover from them, whether they're even a concern, that kind of thing. Yeah, where shall we start?
I can get straight into them. I'm sure some common ones would be like DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, and just general muscle fatigue, particular inflammatory markers or inflammation in general that people may have heard of, and assume maybe what they're doing is helping to reduce inflammation and reduce the muscle damage. So yeah, covering all of those I think will be of relevance for sure.
Yeah, the DOMS is one that you would have probably had to deal with a lot as a physio, I'm guessing. Did you ever do a physio for sports teams or anything?
A little bit, just when I was throughout playing netball, I would for the netball teams. But and I think as well interesting, the odd time you'd get patients if it was sort of their first time experiencing DOMS and they thought that they had injured themselves or done something wrong because they were in so much discomfort when I was sort of like, I had to then explain, I'm like, you're experiencing DOMS. You know, they had done something super intense that they'd not done before, that they weren't accustomed to, and obviously sort of overloaded and were quite, stressed that they had done something wrong to their body. And like, your body's just recovering.
So one of the things with DOMS is it's also accompanied by some degree of muscle damage that's occurred during the exercise, and so you're experiencing the after effects of that. DOMS, actually, it's quite interesting, will usually occur when you're exposed to eccentric load. So an eccentric load is when your muscle is lengthening under tension. So a concentric contraction is when your muscle is shortening under tension. But particularly with eccentric loads, it causes more muscle damage, basically. And in cases where someone's untrained and they're exposed to eccentric load. So a classic one is lots of downhill running. People think, oh my God, this course has a whole lot of downhill in it. It's going to be easy as, and then they're ruined for like a week afterwards. And the reason is because as you're going down the hill, your leg muscles are eccentrically loading, and you're just doing that over and over again. So if you haven't done that much in your training for the event, or you're a weekend warrior and you recover for the 5 days before you go and exercise for the 2 instead of the other way around, like what athletes kind of do, then that's going to induce a whole lot of muscle damage and then be accompanied by DOMS. And there's actually research to suggest that if you want to avoid that, then introducing some eccentric loading into your training earlier on has a protective effect against that DOMS, purely because you've actually exposed it to what it's going to be exposed to on race day, in the case of something where you're doing like a competition, or if you just have heavy training loads. So like having a program that follows sort of the progressive overload principle will help with that, because you'll steadily be exposing yourself to levels of muscle damage, and it rebuilds, recovers from that, and then won't be as damaged by the next time you introduce that same load.
I think that's something that's so often, like you said, if people are training for some sort of hike or something that involves hills, they practice a lot of that uphill component, but not the descent, which is, like you said, is going to be quite taxing. I saw a physio that I follow shared the other day about doing hill sprints, and he said often people say, you know, should I just be recovering and walking down after I've done the uphill component, or should I still be running down? And he said, well, again, it depends on your goal. If you're just doing the hill sprints for that, you know, anaerobic kick, then just do that and recover on the way down. But he said, for me, I'm training for an event that I know I'll have uphill and downhill. So he said, I want to build up my capacity to that eccentric load. So hence I'm doing my sprint up, but then I'm jogging down and sprint up, jogging down type thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that the main takeaway from that is you can prepare and reduce the level of DOMs that you have by introducing yourself to that kind of, exposing yourself to that stimulus in your training, and do it progressively, and then you won't be completely ruined when you hop off it. But yeah, so that's one major thing that we're sort of concerned about the stress that exercise introduces, and it's what a lot of recovery strategies or modalities are targeting, is reducing that level of DOMs and increasing the rate of recovery and rebuild of the muscle after it's been damaged like that. And whether or not they're effective at doing that is up for debate with a lot of different modalities as well. So that's sort of something to keep in mind when you're looking at a modality for yourself and trying to decide, will this help? Because DOMS is quite painful. And so if something can sort of reduce the soreness, then that can be helpful in certain contexts. It's very difficult to kind of find something that really properly increases the rate of recovery of muscle damage more so than what your body can do naturally if you just rest yourself, to be honest. So that is kind of a teaser for what.
Well, I guess that's why so often DOMS they say it lasts 1 to 2, maybe 3 days max, because again that's when your body has been under that load that it's not accustomed to. It takes 2 days for the muscles to recover, rebuild themselves, and for that pain to dissipate, really. And
you don't there's also an argument for potentially not reducing the amount of soreness that you have from DOMS, because it's there for a reason. It's you're healing from muscle damage, and if you reduce the soreness to a point where you can override it and train again at loads that you probably shouldn't do, because you're introducing excess damage potentially as well, and it's not going. It's not just a linear thing where the more damage I produce, the stronger I'm going to be. You've got to do it in little bouts and very strategically for your muscle and your body to adapt.
Our body's good at letting us know. It's saying, hey, give me a rest, I'm trying to heal, and I'm giving you this sort of slight discomfort to let you know, don't go force me to run today or force me to go lift heavy weights again.
Exactly.
I'm recovering.
So exercise-induced muscle damage and DOMS, that's sort of one thing we're thinking about post-exercise. Another is rehydrating after exercise and making sure if you are doing a sport or an activity that depletes your glycogen is basically glucose that's stored in your muscle that's used as an energy source during endurance exercise in particular, making sure that you're replenishing that store. That's another sort of target for recovery in some cases. There's also this idea too that after high intensity exercise we have these metabolic disturbances where we get this buildup of lactate and hydrogen ions as well, and that the faster we get those away, the quicker we're recovered. And then finally, what you said before, inflammation, which is also it's something that happens after exercise and is often a target for these different recovery modalities. But as we'll learn, inflammation is a really, really important part of actually adaptation. And so counter to what people might feel is intuitive, you actually want an inflammation process after you've introduced damage, because it helps you to rebuild. And so these different modalities that either try and shunt blood flow away by constricting vessels, or ones that use different drugs to try and reduce inflammation, are potentially delaying your adaptations as opposed to improving your recovery and speeding them up. And that's something I don't think is always, for some people it might feel counterintuitive, because it's inflammation bad. But no, in some cases, in many cases, in injury as well, inflammation is good.
We'll have to do it. Maybe we could do an episode on that, and on why it's no longer the acronym for an injury is no longer RICE, that it's peace and love. So, which is a very long one, but it includes not really worrying about ice straight away, or worrying about compression or anti-inflammatories and things like that. So
even the guy who originally came up with RICE has since come out and been like, I was wrong. Get rid of ice out of the RICE.
Which
which I think is a great sort of example of science at work. There was evidence that was starting to accumulate that it's counterproductive. And so the guy that, you know, came up with the protocol was like, oh my goodness, let's like change this around.
And I think it comes down to that understanding of what inflammation is. And I remember, again, probably second year of uni, learning about inflammation, the inflammation process. And I remember at the time when we were learning about what it does and why it's so good for us and why it's essential, there was a few of us who were like, well, why do we ever want to stop this? Or why do we try and stop it or prevent it or slow it when it's what's bringing all the nutrients and helping healing and helping the injured area? But then we're still like, rice.
Yeah.
Like, sort of had that disconnect between like what we'd learned about inflammation and then what we've been learnt to help with an injury. So I think it's over time that's sort of caught up with like, actually inflammation is usually essential and necessary to start healing. So why would we want to be stopping that? But
yeah, I had a similar experience actually when I was learning about this kind of stuff in undergrad. We were being lectured by a guy called Paul Marshall, who does a lot of, or at the time I think he was doing work in chronic low back pain, but he did this whole sort of series on non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and essentially how people who use them kind of chronically are shooting themselves in the foot, basically, because you're stunting that inflammation process, and it's so important for repair and for recovery. He wasn't talking about that in the case of low back pain, but he was talking about it generally in recovery from injury. So this notion has been around, well, and we've known this for a long time, but it's just sort of, it takes a while for things to kind of filter into practice.
Yeah, definitely.
So you would be forgiven for thinking, you know, that like that inflammation is bad and we want to stop it at all costs. I feel like if you're not sort of in the industries that we're in, because we get given all these kind of conflicting messages, and if you're a layperson that's just wanting to like do good.
I think they say it takes 10 years from when the science changes to when that actually comes to be general knowledge to people. So it is things that take time to sort of change everyone's idea and beliefs and understandings of these different things and how they do change as science changes. So just to kind of summarize what we were talking about, those are the sort of four main things that we're concerned about post-exercise. Some of them are worthy of concern, others are not so much. So one of the ones, an example, is the thing about metabolic disturbances after high intensity exercise. Your lactate and hydrogen ions that build up after that are normally cleared within 90 minutes back to like resting levels. So try, if your next exercise bout isn't till tomorrow or even like several hours after, then like engaging in a recovery modality that's targeting that, it's not really as worth your time if you're trying to allot time to different sorts of things. You'll recover as long as you just kind of rest. So one of the ones that's often been used for that is active rest, is one that kind of targets that. Another one which I think is sort of interesting is the rehydration and glycogen resynthesis one. That's one where rehydration after exercise isn't as like difficult as what like Gatorade and Powerade might make it seem like it is. So we're never going to be sponsored by like supplement companies or like or sports nutrition company, like people selling a product, because we basically come in and be like, just have some water and eat some salty chips, because that essentially will rehydrate you after your exercise, as long as you're refueling properly. It's when you start to not eat enough after a big bout or chronically you're not refueling yourself that things become difficult. But if you're basically listening to your body, and I know in some cases people have trouble listening to their bodies because their relationship with their body is not where they want it to be in terms of listening to their hunger cues and things like that. But if you can get to a stage where you're doing that, then drinking to thirst and eating to what you sort of feel like your body needs and to a sense of where you're full after your exercise is sufficient. And like you said, again, depending on that time, I guess if someone have back-to-back sessions where maybe they only have half an hour between events or something and they can't eat enough, and that's where, like you said, maybe things like a Gatorade will come in handy if someone prefers that liquid supplementation versus the ability to have a meal. But like you said, for most people, if it's just one event and you don't have that next event or training session till the day after or so, as long as you're refueling with good food and water, it's probably
and
sufficient.
for your training, in order to kind of recover optimally for adaptation, then the same sort of thing applies basically, depending on the length of time between your training sessions. But I'd say most people are probably doing 1 a day. Sporadically, maybe they'll throw 2 in there. But as long as you're eating enough and you're drinking to thirst, you're not sort of cutting. Don't restrict your water intake or anything, for God's sakes. But there's no need to kind of really hammer down the water. Be like, I've got to hit this water target for today. It's not as important as what you might see on Instagram, where people have these huge like things of water. Drinking to thirst is normally fine.
Usually sufficient. Awesome. All right, shall we get into some of these?
Some of these different modalities. So some of these, like, I've tried because they sort of just feel good as well, you know? But we'll go through the different mechanism and
a lot of the evidence says that for some of them is that they feel good, and sometimes that's all they do.
Exactly.
Which is not a bad thing either.
No, it's not. Okay, so let's go through some of these different recovery modalities. Shall we just do like an overview of ones that we've heard of, and then we can maybe dive into different
think so.
ones?
Yep,
so some of the ones that I've got here are pneumatic compression boots. You might have seen those. That's a very expensive type of recovery strategy, I suppose. What else? I've got sort of more wacky ones like hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yep, I'd listed that.
Sort of more New Zealand and Australasia Pacific specific one is Kava. That, it sort of falls into like a herbal remedy, I suppose. Near infrared saunas and saunas. CBD oil. What other ones have you got?
Mine are, I think, are a bit more of your usual like static stretching, foam rolling, massage, general compression garments like your stockings and clothing. Cryotherapy or cold water immersion.
Cryotherapy, I always have to remind myself of the definition, because I just think of someone crying in therapy for a really long time and then leaving and being like, oh, I feel so much better.
Well, hey, maybe it's got 2 definitions. So they were kind of I tried to sort of pick ones that I guess are applicable to general people, because I feel with some things like your hyperbaric chambers and certain compression stuff, it's unless you're an elite athlete maybe, or you have access to those sort of things, you might be someone that is more just a stretcher and a foam roller. Shall we sort of go with ones that to begin with that are kind of geared at trying to manage that DOMS and muscle soreness sort of stuff, which I think, so like massage would be one of those, right? And then whole body cryotherapy, another one. Compression garments. I mean, I think rolling. Most of the outcomes they were looking were around reducing DOMS, perceived fatigue, muscle damage, and biomarkers as well in the blood. So like you said, lactate levels and creatine kinase and things like that, to see if it's having an effect on inflammation, things like that. So, which I found a lot of the data's a bit mixed, especially when it comes to your systematic reviews and things, is trying to see, how long they're doing it for, like how long they might be holding a stretch and how often they're doing it. Same with foam rolling, like that was very, one, there's not a lot of research on it, and then 2, it's not the best quality in regards to the methodologies used with it. Overall, for static stretching, a lot of the time it wasn't much better than just passive rest.
So the idea with static stretching is basically that, I mean, regular stretching we covered this really in the last session. Regular stretching will kind of maintain a good ROM or range of motion of the different joints and kind of keep the muscles supple and ready to go. In your sort of look at the research, was that generally the same kind of proposed mechanism? Is that it just kind of moves the muscle through its ROM and then helps flushing out toxins or something, or whatever those are?
I think, again, so like I said, the mechanism wasn't that clear, but I guess it's that thought of stretching. So example, if you've just been running or whatever, stretching your quads, the muscles that you've just used, that by stretching them, you're going to be reducing that muscle soreness or the muscle damage. But the effect was no different really to just passively resting afterwards. And I think there was benefits in regards to perceived muscle soreness and recovery, but the markers of specific muscle damage and inflammation were no different to at rest. So it might have felt better, or you might feel like I'm not going to be as sore, but those biomarkers of muscle damage were the exact same.
Yeah, so I think stretching is a really interesting one because it's a really excellent placebo. So placebos can be very powerful and they can translate to a benefit to somebody. Placebo doesn't mean a lack of an effect. In fact, so it's not dismissed as something that, you know, if there was a placebo effect, that there was no effect at all. There was an effect. It just isn't attributable to the thing that originally someone might attribute to it. So, I mean, actually, even in stretching, could they do any placebo control there?
I don't think so.
Because lots of these you can't do a placebo control. But it does have the elements of a good placebo in the sense that if you have a regular stretching regimen, you have a sense of agency over like what you're picking as something to be effective, and it's sort of routine and you can take yourself through it. And in the context of recovery as well, it can potentially, for some people, serve as a period of time where they don't do anything else other than that, and that is good rest and relaxation. So it's, the sort of proposed mechanism, it's kind of similar with foam rolling. I think the proposed mechanism there is really like trying to, so our muscles are covered in this connective tissue called fascia, and it's trying to get out adhesions between the fascia. That's the proposed mechanism, right? And in doing so will relieve tension, help with muscle soreness, etc. In that case, it doesn't work by that actual mechanism, it seems like.
I think it's been studied, like the force needed to break up adhesions in your fascia is like ridiculous amounts that you wouldn't be able to apply by lying on a foam roller or even through the force of someone's hand. So I think similar to stretching in that it's more that perceived feeling of feeling recovered, and that even I think that some of the studies that did have notable changes between foam rolling and a control group, it actually failed to exceed the minimal detectable change threshold. So yes, there might have been a change, but it was, you know, like 1%. So
not clinically or practically relevant. I mean, actually in some studies stretching is used as the control group for like training studies and stuff, because it doesn't really do anything.
But it's one of those things, like for both things they can feel good, and like we said, not negating the placebo effect, in that if stretching obviously feels good and you enjoy it, do it, but don't feel that you have to stay for the cool down track in a class.
If
the stretches.
It's not going to reduce your injury risk, and it's not going to enhance your recovery over and above going home and sleeping, if that's the goal. But people have other goals that they might have when it comes to stretching as well.
Like you said, if someone's got flexibility goals and therefore they are putting in that time to do regular stretches to be working on their range, then fair enough. But don't think that it's going to change your recovery that much.
What about, you just mentioned before that the type of force that you'd need to put through to get rid of adhesions in the fascia is more than what a foam roller could apply, or what manual sort of therapy or massage could apply. What's the deal with massage guns? I've never used one, but I see them talked about a lot and some people swear by them. Does that introduce enough force? Is that force also, if you introduce too much, it would probably induce more muscle damage as well, I imagine.
Exactly.
Are massage guns, are they capable of doing that, or?
So when I was having a look-see, there was no actually like RCTs or systematic reviews or anything really on specifically massage guns. There were a few studies that when looking at massage, it included the use of percussive massage guns, and again, not a huge difference. Like one in particular in regards to helping with like blood flow and that kind of thing, it was no better than just someone doing light quad contractions after exercise. So again, didn't seem to be a huge difference, but there was that, again, perceived level of DOMS was less of someone's massage leg compared to their non-massage leg. And
so it made people feel sort of better for a period of time.
And again, they were usually short-lived, I think up to 4 days, and it was then no different compared to the control. So for that sort of first 24 hours, they probably felt better in that leg that was massaged, or that body part. But after about 4 days, it was no different to the non-massaged leg.
Right.
So I'm not a don't use a massage gun either. I think, again, if you enjoy it, it feels good, then awesome, but it's probably, again, not having those effects that you're thinking it does in regards to recovery.
Yeah. When you start to stack up all these different sort of recovery strategies, it could be almost a part-time job.
Yes.
Like if you spend time with your massage gun and then you go into the near-infrared sauna and then hit up the like cold water immersion stuff, and it's when it starts to become like that, maybe then is when you sort of ask questions of like, oh, is this taking away time from recovery even though I'm supposedly recovering?
Yeah. And there was a tendency for untrained subjects to actually benefit slightly more from massage than trained athletes, so that was another
and that makes a lot of sense, kind of going back to what we were talking about with the eccentric loading thing, how you can protect yourself from DOMS by introducing a training stimulus earlier on than an event that gives you a protective effect because the muscle's adapting to that, and trained athletes are going to be very well adapted to what they're introducing to themselves in training regularly if they're doing it consistently. Whereas someone who's untrained or just restarting exercise, it makes sense that they'll have worse muscle soreness and then also probably going to benefit from something that helps them with their perceived reduction in pain.
Yeah, definitely.
Shall we talk about whole body cryotherapy and cold water immersion?
Yeah, I saw a bit of mixed info on all this, so...
So whole body cryotherapy is basically really cold air that you go into a chamber and then they blast cold dry air onto you for about 3 minutes. And it's not, people will claim it's really different from cold water immersion. It's not really in the idea of what it's trying to do or the proposed mechanism by how it's trying to work, which is basically it's trying to shunt blood and inflammatory cells away from the injured tissue by making you cold, which vasoconstricts your blood vessels essentially. And they do that in an attempt to try and speed up your healing. So this is an interesting area. I see lots of people doing cold water immersion all the time, and I often, when I see it, I have to wonder whether like actually hopping into a bath of ice is quite stressful in itself. So you've just exercised and then you're like adding another stressor on top of the stress that you just introduced.
That's where I think I see outside of the recovery realm, I see the cold water immersion and the ice baths as that type of thing of adding that stress to your body to obviously make yourself sort of breathe through it and relax through it so that you're better able to adapt to other stresses throughout your life. I guess that's the sort of the Wim Hof method and that kind of thing.
Sort of mental grit. So when people are using it for that kind of thing.
And there's an Australian researcher, David Sinclair, who does a lot of work into longevity, and he's listed those extremes of temperatures as a natural stress on your body that does seem to have effects on aging and preventing aging alongside exercise and fasting as natural stresses on the body. But like you said, when you've already stressed the body
and your goal is recovery, so in the context of recovery and trying to maximize your training adaptations or your ability to then re-engage in the exercise, this it again depends on the context. So there are studies that show that if you do cold water immersion after exercise in the middle of a training cycle, that your gains from like a strength training cycle are actually diminished, because so if you're doing exercise like arm curls and you ice this arm but don't ice that arm, you'll have less muscle being built up in the arm that you iced than the one that you didn't. And so if you're in the middle of a training cycle and your goal is to try to build up those adaptations, then regular cold immersion for recovery is likely not the best strategy at all, because you're actually just delaying the process of recovery, essentially, because again, going back to the idea of inflammation and blood flow, the restricted blood flow isn't maintained infinitely after you finish. It's only for that period of time and a little bit of the time after, potentially, and then the inflammatory process just resumes as it was going to afterwards. And so it's counterproductive in that scenario to use icing as your main recovery strategy. When it's in the scenario of you've got a performance requirement, you're competing or something like that, and your turnaround is really quick, then icing can be helpful for reducing soreness, or that sort of feeling of like this hurts and it's doing something, and it's helping me recover for my next bout of exercise. But there you're not trying to target training adaptations, you're just trying to get yourself prepared for doing the next bout of exercise. So for example, an NBA player in his season build up where he's training, using ice baths regularly there, not very helpful. When they're in the middle of the season and they're literally playing every single night, potentially it could be a recovery modality that's helpful. And so it's kind of the idea of like periodizing your recovery strategy in that case for this one anyway.
I sort of found the same thing, that it said a lot of times some of the findings of research sort of led to suggest that the treatment belief and the placebo effect was sort of at play when it came to cryotherapy and cold water immersion. What else did I have? Same with the cooling effect didn't really affect any objective recovery variable in a significant way come the 4-day mark compared to doing nothing. And some found that the cooling effect was actually quite small, although the ones said that if you were going to do it, that like whole body immersion is better than part body, and that immersion is better than just using an ice pack, like example putting ice packs on your quads versus the full ice bath, and that if you were going to do it, around 10 to 15 minutes at 10 to 15 degrees was optimal for the results.
10 to 15 minutes, that's brisk, for a full cold water immersion. Maybe I have to try it sometime and just like see if I can mentally get through that. Apparently if you do the whole body cryotherapy, it's a lot more comfortable because it's a short period of time and that it doesn't feel as cold. Even though I found again anecdotally when I used to play a lot of netball and do netball carnivals where it was multiple games in a day for 3 or 4 days straight, that we always stayed at this hotel and our coach made us, it was in the middle of winter, and our coach would always make us go in the outdoor pool after every day, and we'd all be like, no, it's freezing. But I remember there was one day that I didn't, that I was like, no, screw it, I'm not doing it. And the following day again was so sore, achy, and was like, great, I've got 4 games to kind of get through. And yet every day that I did do it, the following morning I woke up just feeling fresh as if I hadn't done any exercise the day prior. And that's when I was like, okay, this is helping. Where it's helpful, right?
But like you said, in regards to just doing it all the time for the sake of it, probably not so much. But I do think when you've got those sort of back-to-back tournaments or events where you are doing activity Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, it's probably worthwhile doing it on those evenings to kind of get you feeling good for the next day.
There's actually I'm not sure if he still works there now, but there's a sports scientist at the 76ers, the NBA team, the Philadelphia 76ers. Yes, Philly 76ers. I hope I got that right. Goodness. But he actually, in his approach in presenting these different sort of recovery strategies to players, he is very transparent with where the level of evidence is at for each of them. So he gives them a choice. He's got these different stations set up, and he gives them a choice, tells them the evidence for and against each. A lot of them have not much evidence for their effectiveness at speeding recovery necessarily, but that approach I think is interesting, and it's kind of nice that like his transparency and his ability to give them a sense of agency over which one they pick to use and kind of engage with potentially, and gives them some benefit from it in a way because of that, they're engaging in something that they believe in or feel works for them. It's also kind of that forced time to relax after certain training sessions or after heavy games where they can decompress and relax and get into the mode of recovery, which we know is definitely effective, which is rest and hopefully and sleep.
I know that AFL have done that in regards to comparing like ice baths versus just room temperature, like warmish lukewarm water bath versus walking in the ocean, and they found like walking in the ocean was superior. And whether it's that added benefit of like being in the ocean and it was like the salt water and I guess the more social aspect of it as well, versus just like sitting in an ice bath by yourself freezing and being like, when's this over, when's the timer gonna go, like walking in the beach with friends probably wouldn't feel as
And that's one thing I would like to see more in this recovery research. I'm sure there's many scientists that are incorporating it, is using some more of those, what you might think of as subjective or psychological measures, like mood questionnaires and things, because it kind of captures whether or not something might be significantly effective, and as well as capturing some of that individual variation between between people, as well as the biomarkers and all the sciencey stuff that we geek out on, I think, too. And not just pain. Because like earlier I gave Carver as an example of a recovery modality that some people engage in. Rugby players have been known to sort of do this. I think the Warriors for a while had a post-game ritual sort of thing where they would sit together and drink Carver in a traditional sort of way, so you're not consuming huge amounts of it. And they were finding that it was beneficial because it was sort of like and they're not sure whether to attribute it to the Carver or potentially the environment around it is a very family-friendly environment, like conducive to socializing and relaxing, and that potentially could be the factors that actually help recovery because they're promoting rest and relaxation.
Relaxation. For sure. Definitely.
So the next sort of one I think that you see a lot of is compression garments or things that are aimed at trying to aid circulation. The funny thing with these is you often see elite athletes kind of, behind these, but athletes are certainly not the people that have trouble with circulation.
And the effect, again, seems to be quite small, if there is any, and there also doesn't seem to be a clear dose relationship with what level of pressure is needed. So I think that's still quite unclear in the data.
That's going to vary hugely too, depending on the fit of the garment, which is really hard to try and predict when you're like looking at sizing charts and things. You don't know how much pressure it's going to,
There was one sort of study that again found quite like non-significant trivial differences between groups, and that was when basketball athletes were wearing compression garments after training. They wore them for that night and while they slept to see if that would reduce their fatigue and improve their recovery to play again the next day, and it was again no real difference there compared to their control group. So
I saw one in rugby players where there wasn't improvement in inflammation and muscle soreness with compression garments, but one of the things that they brought out at the end was that rugby is potentially, especially at the elite level, like quite a traumatic sport. So the level of tissue damage that you've potentially got is a lot higher than what you might have if you're going and doing your grit class. So just keeping that in mind. But if it makes you feel good, and
I think there was one that said that the best benefits were with a strength training group versus endurance and things like that. So I think again slightly different results given what type of exercise you're engaging in. I think for again the cost of them, and if you like wearing them, like I remember when my sister played basketball, she always wore like the skins under her basketball shorts, like the knee length ones, and most of her team did, and which is what they did. So I think again if you've got them and you enjoy wearing them, they feel good, cool, it's not going to do any harm. But like again, is it going to be a make or break in regards to you feeling achy the next day or not? Like probably not. So
just keep that in mind when you're making your decisions around as a consumer, I guess.
Especially with like you said, when sometimes there can be so much marketing around that kind of stuff, and like you said, you see a lot of elite athletes wearing like full length compression garments that you do think, oh, maybe that's what I need. And I think a lot of times, even if there is like a 1% increase in performance or 1% reduction in fatigue, a lot of elite athletes, they will do anything for a 1% gain. So if that means wearing compression garments, they do it. But like for the average person, are you going to go out and spend $100 on compression garments for your legs to, probably not. But
or if you don't have the money to do that, or that's just not something that's available to you right now, then it's not going to be the make or break of your performance in a sport that you're really passionate about and that you want to do well at. That's another good takeaway from these things. If you don't have access to them and you're quite a serious sports person, or you've got these goals that you really want to hit, these are not the things that are the things that will limit you. The things that are going to enhance your performance, your training and your recovery are focusing on the foundations of that. And that's true whether you're a serious athlete or you're looking at just wanting to improve your fitness generally. Focusing on the foundations of what you're doing. So recovery, really the foundation of that is prioritizing your sleep and your rest and managing your stress where you can. And for people with jobs and kids and work that's stressful, that's not easy. That's something that has to be learned and tweaked all the time, and we don't always get it right. So you can geek out on these things for sure, but having that kind of balanced approach where you can step back and recognize, oh, you know, I can't afford these compression garments right now, but I can focus
on the other things
on some of those
and
things.
I think it comes back to always wanting that somewhat quick fix or magic pill. Like, it's like, oh, if this is going to help me recover faster, boom, sign me up. When so often it's like, no, you just need to master the basics, and then maybe down the track you could look at adding in these 1% things. But really you want the 90%, like you said, to be your rest, your sleep, your nutrition, good training, and it's kind of what you need.
And being able to listen to your body, I think, honing that sort of ability to listen to what it needs and then actually follow through and give it what it needs. So if you've been set a training program or something that you're following and you're completely smashed, then leveraging these tools isn't the first thing to do. It's to try to be like, maybe I am on that cusp of overtraining to the point where this isn't beneficial anymore, and what I need is the recovery.
I need to adjust my training.
The recovery in the form of just rest and providing more time in between your training sessions.
I find that interesting. I think there's probably some people out there though that do, you know, are feeling extra strong and just think, oh, I just need to foam roll more, versus like, no, maybe you need to stop overtraining. You know, look at what you're doing and maybe look at cutting back versus being like, oh, I just need to get on the foam roller more. It's like, no, I think you need to maybe just look at your training program and sort of make sure you've got a rest day in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think too, there's a sense that we see it and when we see top athletes compete as well. And it's also this message that comes through a lot in the fitness industry of like the go hard or go home. So when you see people competing at the top level of their game, it's amazing. Like you watch someone like Lisa Carrington just like clean up at the Olympics or something like that, and you're like, that's incredible. And you sort of think, I need to have the kind of attitude that she might take when she's about to do a race to my training every day.
Which is no excuses, like go hard every day. Yeah.
But there is a lot of the training that happens in the lead up to that's very boring. They're not pushing the limit on things, because if you did, you start to get into that sort of stage of overtraining where things become counterproductive. There's very sort of strategic high intensity sessions usually, and a lot of work that happens in like zone 1, zone 2.
Very low intensity. Yeah. And I think it's with the elite athletes, it's that discipline to follow their program. So when they get given a zone 1 day, which like some people might be like, oh, boring, I have to go for a super slow jog, or boring, I'm doing a Pilates. But they're disciplined in that they do that. They know that this is a low intensity day and I have to follow that. Tomorrow's a high intensity day where I will be giving 110% to my running or my rowing or whatever it might be, and they sort of respect their program. And that it's specific for them, and in order for them to compete at their best when that time comes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the good athletes that are in their sports for a really long period of time have learned how to do that, and there's probably been mistakes along the way where they've dipped into that point where they've overtrained but been able to pull it back. But I think one of the things that can be damaging about that notion on the other side of that, the general population or those of us who are really passionate about exercise and fitness is that we apply that thought to our own training, and it actually can become very easy if you're not an elite athlete to still overtrain and be in a continual state of dipping into reserve that you don't have, reserve that should be given to your rest and recovery. You know, I know in health often we're trying to promote more activity in people, but I think generally that for those that are listening to this, a lot of them tend to, a bit like what we were talking about in the COVID episode, they're more likely to err on the side of probably doing too much. And just need to kind of fine tune that relationship with their body where they can listen to it and sort of pull back
when they need to have those lower intensity days, which, like you said, again, elite athletes are going to have that program written out for them, and it's a matter of them just like doing as they're told type thing from their coaches, whereas obviously for a lot of us, we're not going to have a program written for us, and it's sort of like you said, that's where it's more important than to be listening to your body and being like, okay, how am I feeling? Maybe today I do need to pull back and just do something of lower intensity or lighter exercise versus HIIT all day every day. And then we don't need to worry so much about recovery modalities if we're sort of, again, if you're having those rest days, it's sort of, I find it almost becomes like less relevant to have to worry about all of these sort of things.
Yeah, I guess the final one that we could touch on that I sort of mentioned at the beginning of this when we were talking about inflammation was the use of ibuprofen or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories as a way of trying to address DOMS and inflammation, muscle damage, that kind of thing. That's something that I think is perhaps more common in running circles. I mean, I've heard it when I was quite into running, that was sort of something that people would do. They'd be like, I call it vitamin I. Ibuprofen. But yeah, the idea behind it is that you would take it to give you that pain relief and then to speed up the recovery from any damage that the exercise has caused. Unfortunately, for those who have this habit of using vitamin I, it's actually counterproductive to your recovery to the point where it's detrimental. So yeah, like for those who did ultramarathoners that did a 100-mile race that took ibuprofen across the race versus those that didn't have anything, there wasn't any difference in muscle soreness between the two groups. And there's some work to suggest that reducing the inflammation just delays it and is counterproductive to your to the healing process anyway, which we spoke about before. So yeah, definitely don't get into that habit. Also, isn't there stuff on NSAIDs being bad for your gut as well?
Yeah.
It can be really nasty if you're taking them often.
Yeah. I reflect back to 15-year-old Shenae when she had shin splints from, again, doing too much netball. Netball every day because I loved it, and running every day because I wanted to get fitter. So obviously the more the better, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so just got into a habit of taking ibuprofen every day to get through training. And I remember every week Mum would be like, do you need anything from the shops? I'm like, oh, just another packet of Nurofen. And she'd be like, didn't I get you a packet last week? And I'm like, yeah, but I need another packet.
The blister packet just like crinkling every like twice a day, and your mum's like, wow, she's really going through those.
And then that's the thing, it's just if anything it was worse because it was masking as to how bad they were getting. And it was only when I would wake up first thing in the morning and didn't have any in the system, and I sort of first put my feet on the ground and would get that sharp pain in my shins, and I was like, oh fuck, these are getting worse. Like, it's not just now when I'm running or I'm at training that I'm feeling it, it's just walking was hard. And so then by the time my coaches found out and whatnot, and my mum was like, yep, we should probably go see someone instead of you going through so much Nurofen, they were stress fractures. So it was like, you've got to have like 3 months off now, versus
which was not what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, no, not as a 15-year-old that was obsessed with netball. Whereas if I feeling that soreness after training and was like, oh, that doesn't feel good, I probably could have just pulled back then for a week or two and then got back into it, and probably would have been okay, versus missing a good chunk of my season and still sort of battling it on and off after that. So yeah, definitely don't recommend things like that. That like a somewhat could be masking pain of an injury that needs addressing. But meanwhile you're like, no, I'm good. I'm good as long as I've got ibuprofen in my system. I'm fine. So
but I think so these like different kind of modalities that we talked about, most of them, the evidence is inconclusive. There might be some cases where it's useful, but 90%, if not more, of the things that you hear about that are good for recovery, you're probably more likely to be right if you say that they probably don't work in the way that they claim to. But I think when you're sort of approaching recovery, obviously we know that sleep is like the most potent form of recovery. Relaxation also very helpful. Those are the things where, like, if a recovery modality potentially optimizes that or helps with that, I think you can make a personal judgment as to whether or not it's worthwhile putting into how you approach recovering in the context of a training program or your sport or whatever. And so I think there's value that can be harnessed in thinking about it in that way. So that's sort of, I would put those recovery modalities, things like stretching, that kind of routine of doing that can be helpful. Massage potentially, like we said before, if it's some sort of period of time that's allotted and you can get away from your kids for a little while or from stresses, and it's actually just an hour where you can lie down and feel good too if you enjoy it, then that potentially is an effective tool for you, and it's not likely to be detrimental, not unless you're getting super deep tissue stuff that could cause some kind of muscle damage. But like you said, it's probably quite difficult to do. Ice baths potentially in different contexts are helpful. So those sort of, I kind of feel like are in the middle of the spectrum of, like, you know, sleep's on one end, which is very potent and effective. There's kind of these modalities in the middle that potentially you can harness some of the placebo effect with them, or they help your ability to engage in restful states. And then there's a sort of more extreme end of the spectrum, which are like the fads and stuff with these like amazing claims of they bamboozle you with science terms, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Those probably personally for me I wouldn't bother with.
Yeah.
And that might be things like hydrogen water.
Yeah.
Or the hyperbaric oxygen chamber stuff. There was one thing I read on that just made me laugh, because it was like, so the proposed mechanism: increase recovery from soft tissue injury by reducing local hypoxia and inflammation, promoting vasoconstriction. So those things, you know, they kind of sound in line with some of the other things we talked about. But things like reducing neutrophil adhesion, free radical quenching, enhancing leukocyte killing, and promoting collagen synthesis and vessel growth processes. Like, I consider myself a nerd, but if someone told me that, I'd be like, whoa, just calm down.
And also, how are you testing for all those things and proving all of those things? Yeah.
Calm down, sit down. Can you talk me through all of that and how that actually works? But that's sort of one of those things where I feel like it would be oversold to me, and I probably would just stay away from it.
I'd say no thanks.
But I feel like people probably would fall somewhere on the spectrum of like maybe where you and I sit, which is mostly like I'm quite happy to try prioritize my sleep. If I'm feeling really hungry after my training, I'll eat and drink what my body is telling me to do, and if I have to miss a training session because I'm really burnt out, then I'll do it. It's taken me a long time to get to that point. I didn't used to do that, but I do that now. And then there's other people who will possibly do those things, but also be happy to engage in some of these other modalities as well. And if they're not harmful and they believe they're benefiting them, then from a practical standpoint, I don't really see a problem.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, if they've got the time, they're feeling good from doing it, and they enjoy doing it, and it's some downtime for them that they schedule into their day of like, this is my 15 minutes of foam rolling where I don't have to worry about work or my kids or whatever, and I just get to foam roll and relax, and
chat to whoever walks by in the gym or whatever. Then all good.
Yeah, I think it's just not feeling like when I finish a workout, I kind of like to get out and go and not stick around for the stretches, because I know that in regards to that active rest component of bringing your heart rate down, that kind of thing, that I'm going to achieve that by just walking to my car, etc., and moving around throughout the day. I find that helps most, especially if I've done a run and my calves are feeling a bit sore, like if it's a run I haven't done in a while. For me, just moving around throughout the day and trying to keeping relatively active kind of helps more than worrying too much about stretching heaps or rolling heaps.
Absolutely. Like movement. So some of the things we talked about target like circulation and getting stuff. Light movement is a really good thing for reducing pain, and probably the cheapest thing that you can do.
Definitely. Yeah.
Some of these things might help, working by the same mechanism, but that one's something we can all mostly engage in.
But again, you can't sell free things. So.
That's
you
why
can't.
We're
you
never going to
can't
be rich, Shenae.
You can't market like sleep and nutrition and keeping moving throughout the day, doing what feels good. There's no money to be made there. So but it's usually the basics are best. So
and acknowledging that there's a big psychological component to this as well, and there's a lot of individual learning that needs to go on, and recovery isn't just something that sits on its own in its little silo. It interacts with other stresses in your life, your training, which is also a type of stress as well, and what makes up that training and your activity and things like that too. So it's all kind of interrelated.
Definitely.
If
people want to hear some more info, where can they find you, Dr. Char?
I'm on Instagram at Charlie J. Connell.
Awesome, and I'm on Instagram too at Health Coach Shenae. Make sure you're following along at We Are Rise NZ, and subscribe on YouTube as well at Rise Make Life Workout, so you're the first to hear from us when we drop an episode. Otherwise, thanks for listening in.
See you later.